Hello, everyone, and welcome to AI Images. I am 450. First off, I want to set some expectations of what we're doing in this course. I am 450 is a critical topics class. That means we're going to do some thinking about AI images. What are they exactly? What do they mean? More than just making AI images, we're going to be talking about what they represent. Now, if you've done any kind of design, you know that the materials, the medium we use, they're meant to be used with intention. We choose the medium of our expression carefully to fit the best tool for the story that we want to tell. Think about photographs in movies, for example. If you want to show someone's face or remember a specific moment in time, a photograph might do the job. But if you want to tell complex stories that unfold over time, with dialogue and motion, with music, maybe you lean into film or video. You make choices about the tools you use to tell your stories or to express yourself. And right now with AI images, we're really at the birth of something different. And that's an exciting time to think about what we can really do with it. But to figure out what we can do with it, we also want to think about maybe what we should do with it. And in this class, we're going to be looking at the backstory. What is artificial intelligence? What impact does it have on art and images and the way we consume them and the way we make them? And how long have we really been doing this stuff? We're going to be thinking critically about a lot of that. And I want to be clear. I teach this class because I think AI images are pretty cool. There's a lot of what we call magic when we use AI images, but it's also really important to be careful about how we think about what magic is, right? We don't want wizards casting spells on us. We want to be able to use these tools thoughtfully and understand what we're doing. And that can be really challenging with these new tools where what's happening is oftentimes hidden behind a very complex system, a complex algorithm, or what we call a black box that we just can't see what it's doing or how it's making stuff based on what we want to do. And that's really not very useful as artists and designers, right? We want to be able to steer our way through these tools. So we're not going to come at this class with the intention of critique in the sense that we want to stop making this stuff. Instead, as we go through, we want to think about both the interesting stuff that this tool can do, but we're also going to look at some pretty nasty stuff that goes on behind the scenes. So I want to make sure that you, as artists and designers, are informed about this history and the context of today's AI image making tools so that you can make intentional decisions about how you use them, and maybe one day about how you design the tools themselves or design things with them. So I want us to think about the way we imagine AI images, how they're made, what they mean, why, and how we might use them. In this class, we're going to make some AI images. We're going to talk about that later with a project. But first, I want to give you a short overview of what I'm thinking with this class and kind of a summary introduction to the approach that I like to take when I think about making AI images. So if you've taken this class, you've probably seen a lot of these AI images created by tools like Stable Diffusion, DALL-E 2, or Midjourney. Maybe you've used apps like Lensa, or checked out some of the tools offered by Hugging Face or Runway, or maybe you've gone into some Google collabs and tried some things out there. You probably know that these images are created by typing some words into a window called a prompt and getting images back in exchange. Here's an example of one. This is an image created by Stable Diffusion, which combines the style of a psychedelic film director, Alejandro Jodorowsky, with the Disney science fiction franchise Tron. This is the result of putting some words together in a screen, describing the scene in detail, probably tinkering with something in Photoshop. But the images were never staged or filmed. They're just the result of this AI tool, Stable Diffusion, just one of the many tools that are out there. For our first class, I want to go a little deeper into what these images actually represent, because they aren't photographs. There was no camera set somewhere to take a picture of a real event. And some suggest that they're a collage, that bits and pieces of real images are being put together and assembled by the AI. And what we're seeing here are kind of a patchwork of other images, right? But that's not quite right either. So what's a better way to think about what an AI image is? Well, in this class, we're going to look at AI-generated images through a few different lenses. And the first is to think about them as infographics or data visualizations. Here on the left, you have an image of two people kissing, generated by DALL-E 2. And on the right, you have a map of a small area of London with black dots representing cholera cases in 1855. You may not think these images have much in common, but what I'm going to suggest, and what this course is sort of designed to make clear, is that they're essentially the same thing. A little background on this map. In 1854, a cholera epidemic was sweeping London. Nobody quite understood what the cause of this disease was. At the time, it was widely believed that cholera traveled in the air as an ethereal miasma. Nobody knew what germs were or how they spread. On the right, you have a map created by Dr. John Snow. The map visualized the locations of cholera deaths in the Broad Street area of London. Famously, Snow's map showed us visually that these deaths tended to surround a single community water pump. Today, this is common sense, but at the time, this was kind of controversial, and he had to convince the city council to turn the pump off. It was actually just his reputation that let them say, sure, okay, let's try this. But when they did, they saw a corresponding decline in cholera cases. And this map is often credited with creating the field of epidemiology in Europe. The map is a powerful visualization of information. But I want to point out that this map showed us things we already knew. It represented information we already had, but it presented it in a new arrangement. It's a data visualization. Here you see the kind of data that Snow was using to make the map, charts and tables, things you might see in an Excel spreadsheet today. But I want to bring your attention to something here. There's a lot of layers. The first layer is we have the real world. People are getting sick on the streets of London. This is what's actually happening in people's experiences. The second layer is this layer of information that's being gathered about these people who are getting sick. It's gathered by doctors. And each number represents one of these people in the real world who's getting sick. And then finally, you have this map where the black rectangles represent the images, the numbers that are generated by the doctors who are collecting data about real people who are getting sick. Okay? So this is the foundation of data visualization, and this is something we really want to be keeping in mind as we think about data in general, is that there's the real world of real experience and the things that are happening around us. Then there's that reality reflected as information, as data, as numbers in a spreadsheet or a table, right? In order to make sense of the things that are happening in the real world. And from that data, making sense of things in the real world, you can create visualizations that show us those things in a different kind of way than just numbers in a spreadsheet. And ideally can illuminate some things about the reality of what's happening. So here we have a pyramid, and you'll notice it shrinks as you move upward to reflect the sort of compression, the shrinking of information that we have that's visible on the graphic. As it leans, each of these layers representing somebody or something is also representing decisions made about what's included and not included in the greater set of data. Okay? So someone is making a decision about what information to go out and collect, and then they're making decisions about how to present that information, about what has been collected. This is basically called bias. Now, you could go out as a researcher and you can have bias in the information you collect, and machines can also reflect that bias. But machines can also be designed to make sense of data in biased ways. And we're going to unpack some of that in the duration of this class. So for now, remember that whenever we shrink the world down to data and then shrink that data into images and representations, there's a lot of choices about what's being included and what's being excluded, and that matters. For part 2, I want to talk about the datafication of a kiss. Every AI-generated image is an infographic about the data set behind it. AI images are data patterns inscribed into pictures, just like Jon Snow's map. They tell us stories about the data set, and they tell us stories about the human decisions behind it. That's why AI images can become readable, like infographics or maps. When people make images, they consciously and unconsciously encode them with certain meanings, and viewers decode these meanings. Even human-made photographs draw their power from intentional assemblages of choices. They're steering their camera toward certain scenes that express and communicate the stuff that they want to show about what they're seeing. When we make images, we're bringing references towards the making of those images, and when we look at images, we make sense of them through our own references. Here's an example. This is a photograph that went viral. I want you to think about how you interpret this picture. It shows a couple on the ground. Clearly, some sort of riot is happening. The couple seems to be kissing. And at first glance, if you're an American like I am, you might think this is from 2020. Protests were sweeping the US. So this is a situation you wouldn't be surprised to see. You might see it as romantic. You might see this couple that was just so into each other that they wouldn't let a riot and police stop them from making out. And you might see this image as something kind of political and radical. But the reality of this photograph is there's a lot more information that we can look at and find out about the world behind this image. This photo isn't taken in America, it's taken in Vancouver. And it's not from 2020, it's from 2010. It's not a political protest. It's a celebration of a sports victory. And the couple isn't making out. The woman was knocked to the ground, was crying, she was upset, and the boyfriend was comforting her, making sure she was okay. So he's kissing her on the cheek in order to calm her down. Still very touching, but it's a very different story. When we look at an AI image, we don't have this real world context to go and look at. We have the story we make up in our heads, and we can't go out and find out the facts that are really going on behind an AI image. Instead of the real world, AI images have data. They draw out pictures from information in a database. Those pictures may be reflecting things in the real world. They may be illustrations. They may be paintings, right? They may be news photographs. But here we see pictures of people kissing created by DALL-E 2. And kissing doesn't make a lot of sense to a machine. The machine has scanned hundreds of thousands of pictures of people kissing. It understands patterns of pixels getting lumped together whenever the word kissing is in the caption. Yet, when it creates these images, there's something we as humans sense is a little weird. So photographs frame the world and tell us specific stories about that world. We can think of real photographs as the act of finding specific information, leaving out irrelevant information, and showing people what you want them to focus on. In many ways, data sets are doing the same stuff. When we make a data set, we operate within specific cultural, political, social, and economic contexts. How we frame a data set is very similar to the ways we might frame an image. We have a question we want to investigate. What's going on during the sports riot? We find samples of the world that represent that question. Well, here's a couple kissing in the street. This is something that's going on during a sports riot. So we snap that photo when these ideas that we're going out and looking for information about come into play. We want information about what's happening in the world. We go out, we see something, we photograph it, and that's kind of what data is a snapshot of the real world. When we record data, we have questions. What's going on with this cholera epidemic? We identify where the useful data for answering that question might be. Well, who's getting cholera and what do they have in common? Then we seek out ways to capture that data, to find that data. Where do these people live, for example? And once we capture that, we either analyze that result ourselves, as Jon Snow did, or today, with automated data analysis, known as AI, we let a machine do that. In this class, we're going to think about AI images less as photographs and more as data visualizations. And there's a reason for this. If you want to make AI images, you need to understand how they get made. And the way they get made is through a combination of data sets, algorithms, and content moderation decisions. As designers and artists using AI, it's important to understand these systems because by understanding them, you'll learn how to steer them towards doing the things you want them to do. And you'll also understand how you want to use them. You'll understand the decisions being made on your behalf when you ask for an image to be produced. So let's do a little practice run. You're going to learn to make AI images, but first let's try to figure out what's going on with some images that are made for us. This is something called media analysis. Typically, we use media analysis for film, photographs, or advertisements. AI images are not really films or photographs, but they're infographics. They're infographics that don't tell us how to read them. So imagine a map that doesn't have northwest, east, and south on it, right? We have to figure this out by looking for certain landmarks that we do understand and know. So we have to figure this out for ourselves. The first step is to find an image that seems kind of interesting. And I stumbled across pictures of people kissing and found them to just be incredibly strange, so I wanted to explore it. With DALL-E 2, you can enter a prompt into a window and you get 4 pictures back. I asked it for a studio photograph of humans kissing, and these are some of the examples of what it gave me. But why are these images the way they are? Well, the first step is to ask, how does the machine know what kissing looks like? We're going to go into this in more detail when we talk about GANs and diffusion later on. But for now, the short answer is it's got more than a million pictures paired with captions, and it's identifying patterns in those pictures with those captions. This is how diffusion works specifically. DALL-E 2, stable diffusion, mid-journey. So here, for example, we have one way to see this data. You have this big circle with every image in the data set, 4 billion image descriptions in DALL-E 2. Inside this data set, there are labels for specifically photorealistic images. And somewhere else, there are labels associated with actions like running, jumping, cooking, kissing. There's labels that are connected to images of people. And somewhere between all of these things is the label for kissing. For our prompt, photograph of humans kissing. So it's pulling from all these different areas. And when we type a prompt into the window and ask DALL-E 2 for that image, it's assembling information from these categories, finding patterns that appear in them, and then recreating pixels that fit this pattern. That's a high-level, simplified overview. We're going to go deeper into this later. But for now, just assume it's pulling abstract information of patterns from each of these sort of categories, and it's thinking about how they connect. And then it's drawing that into an image. So we may want to start asking some questions about these categories and where they came from. Where did this information come from? Who put it together? What criteria did they use to put these categories together? Does it change what we see or don't see? What's in the data set and what isn't? And how was this data collected? Did people agree that their photographs could be used? Are the outputs representative of the things that we want to see in the world? These are the types of questions that we're going to explore in this class as we think about how to get these tools to do the things we want them to do, and maybe more importantly, how to make sure they don't do the types of things we don't want them to do. So thanks for signing up. Thanks for watching. And I look forward to the next couple weeks.